Okay. Hello and welcome back to the Birdcage. I'm Jack Kenna, joined alongside my good friend Ben Hooke. Ben, how are you doing this morning?
Hi, Jack. How about you?
I'm doing pretty darn good. The Kansas Jayhawks picked up a huge road win on the road in Fort Worth against TCU and now play the host to a top 10 team in the country, the Houston Cougars. Ben, how do you feel going into the Houston game tomorrow?
Well, I feel better than had they lost to TCU. Had they lost to TCU, I'd be in a pretty bad state about this.
Mhm.
Um, we'll see. Honestly, it's college basketball, and really anything can happen.
Yeah, that's a good way to
So,
put it because even though road games are hard to win in college basketball, at the end of the day, these are all 18, 19, 21, 22, sometimes 25-year-olds if you're Hunter Dickinson. But for the most part, these are still young adults playing, so you never know what can happen on a day-to-day basis. Let's go into some details first before we kind of get going. This is going to be an interesting game because the Kansas Jayhawks are in the country on the AP poll. They're 13 and 4 and 4 and 2 in Big 12 play. The Houston Cougars are seventh in the country. I want to make sure I got that right. I think
they
so.
are, yes.
They're seventh in the country on the AP poll with a record of 15 and 3 and 7 and 0 in Big 12 play. Now, they are coming off a huge win against Utah. That game was not remotely close. But the game before that, they played UCF down to the wire in Orlando. What do you think is going to be one of the keys to making sure we can take care of business against Houston tomorrow?
So Houston's super interesting, right? Because they're number seven in the polls. But if you go by all the metrics, like Pomeroy, Bart Torvik, all of their efficiency stuff, they're the best team in the country.
Yeah.
And the reason they're not the best team in the country is that they don't have any marquee wins because they are, as you said, I think 14 and 3,
Yeah,
maybe a little more than
15
that,
and 3, I
15
think.
and 3. But they're 0 and 3 in quad one games. So they lost basically a home game, neutral floor game in Houston at the Toyota Center to Auburn. And then they lost to Bama and San Diego State, both in overtime.
Yeah.
And so the reason the metrics love them is that all three of those games, those three losses are by a combined 13 points.
Hmm.
And they are to two teams in Bama and Auburn who are top five in all the metrics, and San Diego State who are like hovering around about 20th. So
Hmm.
those are like they lost to some very, very good teams. And then everyone else they played besides this sort of bizarre Orlando game against UCF, they've blown out, which really helps their case.
Yeah. The interesting thing about the UCF game is UCF has a lot of returning pieces, and Kansas got them on a night where nothing was falling for UCF. We beat them by 51.
Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah, yeah.
think in Orlando. So we just beat the brakes off of them. But they are a very talented team, and they gave Houston a run for their money on when Houston was on the road. I think it's going to be important. I think the environment will play an important factor in tomorrow's game. It typically does, but in the losses that we've had at Allen Fieldhouse, you've heard words like poor environment used to describe the atmosphere of those games. And
Yeah,
I think this is going to be a very important game because I think this team matches up really well against Kansas.
they do. So, yeah, you talk about the atmosphere. Kansas has lost two games in Allen Fieldhouse in the past 2 years. They lost to West Virginia on New Year's Eve, which was just not a great crowd in general. And then they lost to BYU as their season was already in the midst of a tailspin.
Yeah.
But yeah, really the Houston game last year at Allen Fieldhouse was really the last sort of great moment of the Kansas season before it just all went off a cliff.
Hmm.
Um, and so I watched it back a couple of days ago. First of all, yeah, the crowd's unbelievable. I was there for it in person. I watched it, I was in the stadium student section. But then I watched it back on TV. The crowd, you hear it on TV as well. Self and Samson both talked about it after the game, so it mattered a ton. Um, and I think, yeah, I would strongly expect Allen Fieldhouse will be pretty juiced this weekend. And also, it's like the fourth time ever that Self's been a home underdog.
Yeah.
And it's one of the larger lines against him. Kansas is by an early book line, so this will probably drop because it's not like MGM hasn't posted their odds yet, but Houston's favored by 5.5.
I think I would most definitely take Kansas to cover 5.5.
Yeah, I would agree
Like
with that.
I don't think that's insane at all. Now, let's talk about this Houston team a little bit in depth because they have a lot of key pieces who are playing vital minutes who are contributing everywhere.
Yeah,
They have returning guard LJ Cryer who transferred over from Baylor a season ago. They
he's
have
great.
they have Emmanuel Sharp. They have Jawan Roberts, who I think personally is one of the better big men in the country. And it's one of those things where you're just like, I see why this team gels so well together because there's just so much returning pieces and so much. What's the word I'm looking for? They're old.
Continuity.
They're just like Kansas.
Yeah. Well, you didn't even talk about who I think is arguably their best player, which is JoJo Tugler. So, a little stat question for you. How many players, 6'8" or shorter, since they started tracking these numbers in 2008, have had a offensive rebound percentage over 15% and a block percentage over 15%? This
Is
is
it under?
basically like they're getting more than 15% of the offensive rebound opportunities and more than 15% of shots near them are getting blocked.
And you said 6'8" or under?
Yes.
Let's go 16.
One. JoJo Tugler this year.
Okay.
So he is basically on pace to be like the most impactful undersized front court player in recent history.
Yeah. Well, those
And
numbers you
yeah,
brought up, they would indicate that.
but yeah. So in general, Houston just they grind you out of possessions, right? So
Yeah.
they're 12th in the country in offensive rebound rate. They rebound 38% of their misses. They are 10th in their offensive turnover percentage. They only turn the ball over on 14% of their possessions. And then they force turnovers on 23% of the possessions they're guarding.
Yeah.
So with those three things, they're not the best shooting team. They have some players who can fill it up, no doubt.
Yeah.
But with those three things, they just generate so many more possessions than other teams. And
Now,
so that's where Kansas can't just get out possessioned.
yeah.
Or if they're going to get out possession, they have to do basically what they did at Allen Fieldhouse last year.
Yeah. I agree. I think it's going to be a very important game that Kansas can win the offensive rebounding battle, or not the offensive, just the rebounding battle in general.
Yeah, you have to keep them off the offensive glass. Everyone has to box out.
It's going to be a very important game. Now, you brought up something very interesting. You brought up Ken Palm. The
Yeah,
stat, the stats, they speak for themselves. Houston is this god team. Number one in Ken Palm in
they're
defensive
not
rating.
as they're not as good as they were last year though.
No, they're not.
And
Their
like
offensive rating would speak to that.
2 or 3 years ago, they were like the best team Ken Palm had ever recorded through 25 games, and then the whole team got injured, and then
Yeah,
they had to play power conference teams in March.
yeah. It was not a very good game. Was that when they had who was their guard that was like first team All American?
Oh,
He went to the NBA a year ago, 2 years ago.
yeah, I'm trying to remember. I can look it up later. I know exactly what you're talking about. That
But
not
yeah,
Shed.
they lost to Shed was one of them. They had a few other players who were just dynamite down there for a few years. But this is going to be such an important game and a defensive game, especially because Kansas is fourth in defensive rating and Houston is obviously number one. Now, this Kansas team defensively, they
They're
gave
good.
up they gave up one of their highest scoring games against against Kansas State 2 games ago. And then against TCU, in the absence of KJ Adams, Flory Badunga did enough to hold that under the team's average. What would you make of the last two defensive games from Kansas? And then what did they need to do?
Marcus Sasser is the guy you're looking for.
Marcus Zasser, yes. And then what would Kansas need to do in order to make sure Houston can't have this offensive explosion while KJ Adams is out?
Um, they got to rebound. They got to not allow them to penetrate. Like one of the things that Adams is so good at is that he is a very, very agile big who has a lot of strength.
Yeah.
So a lot of these teams will deploy these sort of long threes and fours who are going to start from the perimeter and are just going to bully their way downhill. And you can't do that with Adams. And then Adams is also the best because those a lot of teams will try to use those guys as screeners in actions. And the thing with Adams is that he's the one of the best switch defenders in the country because he has the agility to stay with these smaller guards. And these smaller guards will often it's a fun thing to watch in a lot of these games where these guards will get Adams switched onto them and think, "Oh, I got the power forward switched onto me. I'm gonna go attack him," and they just can't.
You have to pass it up.
So yeah, I think the thing that you're adding with Badunga is you're adding an elite rim protector and an elite deterrent who also rebounds really, really well.
Hmm.
And what you're losing with Badunga is you're losing some experience and some of that perimeter agility, where Badunga is fine. Like you saw in the West Virginia game, he was picking up full court in against smaller guards and wings and whatnot. But he is not that type of like agile step for step defender that Adams is. And so definitely teams with sort of more agile perimeter bigs who are going to attack inside out.
Hmm.
Um, Kansas started a little. Coleman Hawkins gashed him on in the Sunflower Showdown, and
Yeah.
TCU had some shooters who performed really, really well because Kansas wasn't marking them super well on the perimeter.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, against Houston, it'll be interesting because Houston doesn't really have that kind of guy. They have their forwards they have are both kind of undersized and are both like good lob finishers and good rebounders, but they
Yeah.
get a lot of like their scoring and their shot creation punch from their guards. So
Yeah.
that actually might swing towards Kansas, provided they can get really good defensive outputs from someone from the likes of Zeke Mayo and Rylan Griffin and Shaq Moore.
Yeah. I don't think Juwan Roberts is going to be able. He's not the type of player who's going to take the ball at the top of the key and dribble his way into the paint and score.
No, not
He
at all.
doesn't
Neither's
attempt three
Tugler.
pointers. So this could be a matchup where Floyd Badunga is comfortable.
Yeah.
So yeah, I agree with everything that you're saying so far.
I also just think that you think about experience. Badunga's going to be going against Juwan Roberts. He's going to be going against Tugler. Tugler's only a sophomore, but he's going to be going against some guys who have been in the system for a couple of years and who are just dialed in on getting rebounds. And
Yeah.
like Badunga is excellent rebounder with his size and length,
Yep.
but he's going to be going against some guys who are excellent rebounders with their size, their length, and their technique.
Yeah.
And that can be tough to work against.
Yeah.
So yeah, last year, for example, in the KU Houston game at Allen Fieldhouse, KU dominated on the defensive glass. Houston in the first 10 minutes got two offensive rebounds. And then by halftime, they had six. And by the end of the game, they had like 11. So they were boxing out super hard. They were fighting for every loose ball. It's pretty incredible watching that team last year and thinking, how the heck were they like a 4 seed? Because like
Yeah. I don't even know.
they would go to their bench and like Parker Brown was the first big off the bench. No disrespect to him, of course, but my goodness, like you know, like Nick Timberlake or um Jamar Mc,
Marco down the
yeah,
road.
Omarco. Yeah, it was all that. Actually, it was very impressive. Nick Timberlake grabbed like three defensive rebounds in traffic that I had no idea he was going to get. Watching his
Yeah.
back, and Furphy was phenomenal this game. He was 17 points on 6 of 7 shooting. And one of the ways Houston likes to attack teams defensively is they like to send doubles when a player isn't square to the basket.
Hmm.
So basically, what they'll do is they'll post double on Dickinson, but they'll also, when Kansas sets screens, they wait for Kansas for like DeJuan Harris to turn horizontal, so he's perpendicular to the basket rather than square.
Yeah.
And then they'll send a double at him so he can't just immediately turn and find someone. And I think that's really smart. And what Kansas did in the first game against Houston last year and really didn't do in the second game was pass really well out of this.
Yeah.
So the first game, Dickinson was so good at moving the ball out of the doubles, and uh, Harris was as well, getting the ball to Adams and whatnot on those little roll feeds. Because when Houston sends two at the ball, then it's a 3-on-4 everywhere. Then it's a 3-on-4 everywhere else on the court. You just have to find the open guy.
Yeah. This is going to be extremely fun to watch because, like you said, Kansas didn't pass the ball very well in that second game at Houston.
Kansas was I don't even know if there's like a strong enough word to describe it. They were atrocious. They
Yeah,
scored they scored 46 points. They Their points per 100 possessions was 66, which is really bad.
that's not going to win you
Uh,
any games in college
they
basketball.
shot 12 of 22 from inside the arc, 3 of 21 from outside the arc, and they turned the ball over on 27% of their possessions.
Yeah. A bad outing in Houston, but that just has to make you wonder, was that necessarily because Houston just dialed up this insane game plan, or was it because Kansas was already in the mindset of this isn't our best year, we're already struggling. Now we have to play Houston, who's metrically one of the best teams in the country.
Well, they were one of the best teams in the country. I think they were the AP number one at that point. They only fell to two once they lost the Big 12 tournament final.
Yeah. So it just makes you wonder the mindset going into a drastically poor game like that, especially a
Ye-
game that Houston wanted so much payback for sure.
Yeah, I think Houston had something to prove there. And I think you can say, that game was an outlier. But the game at Allen Fieldhouse was an outlier as well. Kansas shot close to 70% as a team. That's
Hmm.
absurd.
Yeah. We did
They
not miss a shot that game.
they were 7 for 13 on threes, I believe. Like Nick Timberlake had the worst shooting percentage on the team, and he was one of three.
Yeah. Nick Timberlake, speaking of him, he has some of the most terrific 1 year highlights that I have witnessed so far at Kansas. Like his dunks, the stuff that he would be able to do was insane. But overall, he didn't pan
What
out
a
necessarily what
what
we
a disaster. Yeah,
yeah.
especially because the final two that Kansas was looking at was him and Dalton Connect. How about that?
We missed that one, didn't we?
Yeah. There's some things to be talked about with Self, especially this year and in general, of Kansas sort of trying to speed run their program building by just going out and getting the best guys in the portal, not necessarily thinking about fit. And that's definitely played out with AJ Storr, where he's bad this year. Like there are
Yeah.
5 players in the country who aren't good at who are shooting as poorly as him, don't grab rebounds as well as him, don't get assists, don't get steals like Storr. 5. And 4 of them are playing on bad mid majors.
Yeah. It
Um,
he's just having like people call it a slump, but when it
it's not a slump
consistently
though.
happens, it's not a slump.
Yeah, so he's like people are like, oh yeah, well he's not shooting well from three. He shot 32% at Wisconsin last year. He's shooting 28%. That's down 4 percentage points. Like, it's bad. Obviously, like the difference between a 32, 33% three-point shooter and a 28% one is pretty significant once you expand it for volume.
Yeah.
But he's not shooting well. The big difference is that he's getting less of the ball. Wisconsin's usage rate was super high. Kansas, it's not as high, and he's not getting to the line as much. So that's the two differences.
Hmm. Yeah, I agree. It's just one of those where you're sitting there and you're like, ugh.
I
Every time he's on
liked
the
how he
court, I
played
think he
against
tries to do a little too much.
I liked how he played against TCU a little bit more. I
Yeah.
thought defensively, while it's not the perfect approach, just being like, I'm going to go for every possible steal I can get, that's more positive than he's been on defense all year. Other than, I actually thought he was pretty good against Mizzou. The numbers, don't agree with me in the slightest on that, which is a rarity.
Yeah.
But I thought he was pretty good that game. But other than that, yeah. Oh boy. No, he's not doing well.
Yeah.
And then Rylan Griffin, who's been good, he just needs to take more threes. He's shooting like 36%. That's a very reasonable amount, and he's
It's a
just not
respectable
shooting
number.
at a high clip.
Hmm.
Um, yeah.
I
So
have a
that's
I have a game I want to play here real quick.
Go
Just
for it.
because we talked about transfers. And it's kind of this fun thing, and I saw somebody else do it. I saw somebody on the Sleepers podcast kind of do something like this. I want to ask you, would this player transfer back to their previous school if they were given an opportunity?
Go for it.
All right, John L. Davis, would he go back to FAU and leave Coach Calipari at Arkansas?
Is Dusty May still at FAU?
No, Dusty May is not in this exercise.
No.
Okay. Would Omar Bala?
That FAU team got gutted.
Yeah, they did get gutted. They lost. They lost a lot.
Yeah. And they're balling out at different places. Vlad Golden, Michigan.
He is
Pretty good.
having one of the best Big Ten, like big man seasons in a while. He'll probably
Yeah.
be a Big Ten first teamer.
Yep.
What do you think about Omar Bala? Would he go back to Arizona and leave Indiana?
Well, I mean, you see how much he's making at Indiana. That's fair. I don't know. I think he's going to be good anywhere. I really like. I am higher on him than most. I think he's going to be a great draft prospect.
Yeah.
But maybe I think Arizona would be better with him. I don't know if they'd be overwhelmingly better.
Alrighty. What do you think about Coleman Hawkins? Would he go back to Illinois and leave K-State?
No,
You don't
no,
think so?
because
You think he just wanted a fun free year?
yeah, well, because I think he's kind of a draft prospect, but he would have been a bigger draft prospect last year. Um, and I think the way that Illinois is built this year, where they've got all their guards, they score super fast. They've got Keshvaris Yakuchonis running the show for them.
Yeah.
Like, I
When
don't
he
know
when
if
he stays
he's
out of foul trouble.
I, whatever, man. I don't know if he's a clear fit there. I think he was good last year because he was the perfect sort of connective second piece for a team that really just was built around Terrence Shannon.
Yeah.
And I don't know if he's that same secondary piece when they have such an unbelievable offensive hub in Yakuchonis.
It was one of those situations too where that entire team pretty much left.
Yeah.
Like that entire team either went to the NBA, they were bringing in new guys, they left school. So it's one of those situations where, sure, I could understand a world where you would understand and you would be like, I don't necessarily want to sit here and play. What if this all doesn't work out and it's just a rebuild when I can take $2 million down the road, just go mess around with Jerome Tang for a season?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's fair.
Alrighty, and one last player because I just really wanted to kind of, well, let's see. Everyone down this list now is necessarily, I think, at a better spot now than they were a year ago. We can talk about the KU guys, but I think that hits a little too close to home. So
Would you want me to go through them really quickly?
yeah, let's go through them really quickly. What do you think?
Store Store's not in a better spot. That Wisconsin team that's currently there. I mean, you look at what John Tonje's been doing.
Yeah,
You plug Store in that spot, he's scoring 20 a game. So no. Griffin, you could go even with that. He's basically in a slightly lesser version of his Alabama role. Um,
yeah.
and Bama's really good. So
I
I
think
don't
he would
know.
have started on this Bama team.
I think you're dead even. Zeke Mayo's absolutely in a better spot. David Coit, better spot. Shaq Moore, I debatably State's really good.
But I think
But
Shaq's making a good impact right now.
I don't know if he's a clear fit, and he's self really trusts him, which I think is
That
sort
speaks
of rare.
volume.
Yeah. So I think that's probably my five.
Yeah. I think those are pretty good. I really like the idea of AJ Storr, in order to make an impact, I've been saying this for a while, he needs the ball. There are certain players in college basketball who can make an impact without the ball, and I really feel like AJ Storr needs the ball in order to make an impact.
Yeah, no, because I think we've seen what a team where AJ Storr gets a lot of the ball looks like.
We did at Wisconsin.
We did at
5 seed.
Wisconsin, and they were fine. They were a 5 seed. They sort of hovered around the top,
Above average Big Ten team.
above average Big Ten team. They hovered around sort of the top 25. They had that big upset of Purdue in the tournament, which was one of Storr's better games. They really sort of went where he went. And then they got the brakes blown off them by James Madison in the tournament.
Yeah.
So, I don't, like if the desire is, well, we're going to give AJ Storr a lot of the ball, and we're going to see if we can get that Wisconsin AJ Storr back. I don't know if that Wisconsin AJ Storr fits into a Final Four contender.
What do you think before the season? What were your starting lineup expectations? And then how did you think the offense was going to be played around? Like, did you think it was going
Um,
to be ran through Dewan and Hunter and KJ?
yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. I thought it was going to be Harris, Mayo, Griffin, Adams, Dickinson
With Storm
with
on the bench.
Storr and with Storr rolling in off the bench.
Okay.
I thought Storr and Badunga. I thought Storr was good, but he's a weird fit with this team
He really
because
is.
Hunter Dickinson, who's not really an outside threat, Adams, who's explicitly not an outside threat, and Storr's like, again, you've seen his shooting numbers. Like he's not really a shooter either. And so you're putting him on the floor with Harris. Suddenly you've got a lineup where you've got four guys who can't shoot.
Yeah.
Like
Four
that's
four guys
really
where people don't really respect the outside shot. So I think
yeah.
Dewan shoots it at a decently good clip when he
He's
shoots
down.
it. He doesn't
He's
shoot
down
it.
this year. He's shooting like 31%. He was
Oh, okay.
higher last year. He was like 37%. His big breakout year 2 years ago, he was like 41% on
Yeah.
pretty limited volume. And then this
Yeah.
year he's taking the highest volume of his career and he's not shooting super well.
Yeah. I don't know. I like the idea of, I mean, Zeke Mayo has been everything we've asked him to be plus some. He's been incredible.
Yeah. Besides a defender.
Yeah. And road games so far, you can make an argument about
Yeah, it's
the Creighton and the
his
Missouri game.
home road splits are absurd. He's like a 50-40-90 shooter in Allen Fieldhouse, and then like 10 percentage points worse on all stats on the road.
Yeah. Good thing that the Houston game is at home.
Yeah,
Yeah. That is pretty much all I got. I want you to make some final comments on your best friend, um, Calvin Sampson.
sure. We had a pretty funny interaction at Media Day. I asked him like, what did he think newer teams to the Big 12 could learn from how Houston sort of adjusted, and he said you should ask them, which was pretty funny, and I kind of respect it now in retrospect.
Yeah.
I'm a fan of Kelvin Sampson. I think he's a guy who's been sort of given less resources and is sort of an abrasive coach because he really demands a ton out of his players and he's all about like building the toughest team. I don't know if you read the piece in the Athletic about them earlier this year,
I've
but
not.
they were talking about how he would make them do weighted vest sprints up 10 stories of a parking garage while dribbling a basketball.
That's insane work.
Yeah. So he's got those guys to buy in, and he gets these tough, brutal players who will buy in every single year, which is really impressive.
That is. Yeah.
Um, yeah, and then he hasn't quite turned into success. Last year, the team just sort of broke down, and they were basically dead on their feet by the time they hit Duke.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I think he's got a national championship the next couple of years. And next year, he's bringing in a five-star big, which I think one of the first five-star players he's recruited at
Mhm.
Houston. Um, so yeah, I overall I think he's a great coach. He's probably, Scott Drew has a national title, so I can't say he's not anything less than the second best coach in the Big 12, but I would put Samson third, probably. Him and Otzelberger are right there, third and fourth.
Yeah, I agree with everything that you just said there. I think he's a great
I'm
coach. I feel like personally, like personably, he's kind of a hard guy to root for because he's
Yeah,
just
he's kind
so
of sour.
stern. He's just so
Well,
stern and stony.
he's the same way that Bill was. You like the thing is that what we're currently dealing with is sort of late career Bill Self, where he's sort of like chilled out and he's not like as obsessive at all these things, but like, mid 2010s suit Bill Self was an asshole. Um, and he's sort of mellowed out. And Sampson that hasn't necessarily mellowed out at that rate. I think partially because it probably does weigh on him that he's one of the best coaches in the country. He's overperformed at a program that's been very good in their history, but hasn't
Mhm.
had quite the success. Um, and that weighs on him. I think he knows that he needs that national title. Same as, him and Mark Few are sort of in that same boat. They're two very different coaches in terms of coaching style and whatnot, but both of them are sort of that way.
I'm glad I got to meet Bill Self when he was mellowed out because
Yeah.
I feel like mid 2010s Bill Self would have scared the bejesus out of me.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have any final thoughts, Ben?
Uh, I don't. I think my final pick for this is Houston by like 4 or 5. So I think
Yeah,
Kansas covers. I don't feel this is going to be juice to the gills. It's going to be
yeah,
great.
well,
Kansas is a better team than they were last year.
100%.
Kansas also isn't going to shoot 70%. And if Kansas isn't shooting 70%, they're not winning.
Okay. My prediction for this game 64-66 Jayhawks. All-time game in Allen Fieldhouse that I will not be able to attend.
Tough soon.
I
I
know.
will be there for the University Daily Kansan. Check it out at kansan.com and see what other Kansan sports writers have to think about this Kansas Houston game. We've got our staff predictions coming out pretty soon, right? Almost probably when this episode is up, you will be able to go on to kansan.com and read those. So stay tuned. Thank you so much for having me on, Jack,
I
and I'll see
appreciate
you
it.
soon.
I appreciate it, Ben. I'll see you later. Take care, man.
Yep.